Hello and welcome to Crowd Church, coming to you live from Liverpool this Sunday night. My name is Matt Edmondson, and whether this is your first time or whether you've been part of our journey since the beginning, it's brilliant to be with you. We are a community of people figuring out what it means to follow Jesus in real life. Not the polished, perfect version, but the messy, genuine, brilliant reality of this whole thing called Christianity. So let me give you a little roadmap of what's going to be happening over the next hour. We'll have a talk, lasts about 20 minutes, looking at the topic of relationships, which is the section of our series, Becoming Whole, that we are looking at, exploring how Christ makes us whole across every domain of life. After the talk, we've got Conversation Street. Oh yes, this is where we dig into what you've just heard, and you get to be part of that discussion. So if you're with us live, jump into the comments, share your questions, your thoughts and your stories. And of course, if you're watching on catch up or listening to the podcast, then thanks for being part of the crowd too. Right, let's meet your hosts and let's get started.
Good evening and welcome to Crowd Church. It's great to be here tonight. And tonight, I'm Dan, just in case. I always forget to introduce myself. And I'm with the lovely Sharon.
Hi everybody, great to be with you. It'd be great if you could comment in the comments to let us know where you're watching from and say hi.
Yes, definitely. We've got a great talk lined up. We've got the lovely Mike Harris with us today, and he's going to be talking about sibling relationships, which, looking forward to.
Yeah, we just asked him the title of his talk, and I think he said sibling love, and then scribbled that out because there's not a lot of that in the Bible. So sibling relationships it is.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to that. Me and Mike we're both one of 5 siblings, so we used to have big families, and you're just small.
I'm one of 2.
One of 2, yeah. So I think, without further ado, let's pass over to Mike and,
Great. Well, thanks. I extend my welcome to you, wherever you're watching, listening from. My name's Mike, and just before I go into the talk, just a little bit about me. I am from Liverpool, lived here all my life, apart from a couple of years. And I grew up in a large family, or it was large to me as I was growing up, because I am one of 5 siblings, as Dan was saying. Like Dan, I am the eldest of 5. One of the interesting things about my family was that for about 3 months in 1983, so from October 1983 to December 1983, there was 5 of us under the age of 4. So I was 3 at the time. My sister Rachel was 2. My brother Richard was 1. And then we had twins. And so from October till December, there was 5 of us under 3. So I very quickly had to learn how to push a triple buggy and learn how to walk very quickly because there wasn't enough room in the pram for me. I had to get out and start walking. And so I grew up in a party, essentially, with my brothers and sisters, and I loved it. I was very fortunate to grow up with good friends around me, and yes, there were ups and downs, and we're going to have a little talk about that today, but that's where I'm from. I was passed a article that I just wanted to draw your attention to from the beginning, and it was an article in the newspaper that was published recently, and the headline said this. It said, "From Cain and Abel to Charles and Andrew," and it was all about siblings who were in the media who didn't get on, and their ups and downs, and there was lots of different ones, and a few just caught my attention. So one of them was about Liam and Noel Gallagher, and they've obviously had a good relationship, but it's had its ups and downs, hasn't it? And they've had fallings out, and then they come back together. And one of the quotes from Noel was, "I liked my mum until she gave birth to Liam." And I just thought, wow, what a quote. And then a little bit further on, it talked about these two brothers. And this story really, I just found it really interesting. So these two brothers, we had Adolf Dassler and Rudolf Dassler. And these were two brothers, and they grew up in a small town. And they were entrepreneurs. And they had the idea of creating footwear for athletes. That was their idea. And so they started working on it. And the business was only small, but they fell out. To cut a long story short, they fell out and became bitter enemies. And so they split the business in two. The business split in two. It's very sad. And Rudolf Dassler set up his own company, which he called Puma. He didn't call it Puma originally, but it did quite quickly become the brand Puma. His brother, Adolf Dassler, he had a nickname, Addy. And so he joined Addy and Dassler together and created Adidas. And so you had these two companies, Puma and Adidas, in this town. And the town became known. It became so divisive. And so people were just so at each other's throats. You were either part of the Adidas team or part of the Puma team. And it became known as the Bent Neck Village, because every time somebody would talk to somebody else, they'd look down to see what shoes they were wearing, to see whether they were one of us or were they one of them. And that's how divisive it became. And throughout their lives, the two brothers never reconciled. And even when they died, they were buried at opposite ends of the cemetery. Almost like, even in death, they could still argue if they weren't separated. And I just thought that it was really, really sad. And then we come to the Bible. And as I started to wrestle with this idea of sibling love in the Bible, I started looking through the Bible page after page. And, if I'm honest, it became quite difficult to find siblings who demonstrated love for each other. And we could find a few, but it was difficult. What we could find was siblings that just didn't get along. And when they didn't get along, it then caused quite big problems for them in the future. And so, for example, we have Cain and Abel. And I'm just going to rattle off a few relationships here. We haven't got time really to go into every single story. But Cain and Abel, interestingly, Cain, the first person ever born. Abel, the first person to die, because Cain kills him. The first family on earth, and that's what they went through. We also have Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat, if you remember that story. And Joseph and his brothers have a very tumultuous relationship. His father, unfortunately, favours Joseph. His brothers hate Joseph, become jealous of him, and then look to try and kill him. Eventually decide to sell him to some slaves. And later on in the story, and you'll know the story, Joseph finds it within himself because he recognises God's the fact that this was all part of God's plan, and he's able to reconcile with his brothers. And the story is amazing, an amazing story of reconciliation. We've got Jacob and Esau, two brothers again, who, because their parents favoured one and favoured the other, they became envious of each other, they became jealous, and that relationship went sour for decades. So there's some examples of some relationships that were probably quite negative. Some relationships that had moments of positive. So Mary and Martha, who were sisters, and they had a brother called Lazarus. At Lazarus' death, Mary and Martha are both united in grief for Lazarus, which does show that they probably loved each other, that they probably loved Lazarus. Lazarus probably loved them. So that's one moment. Ruth and Naomi, they were related through marriage. They weren't siblings. But the love that Ruth demonstrated to Naomi, and if you want to go and have a look at these stories, you can. They're absolutely amazing stories. But the love that Ruth showed to Naomi was probably what you would hope to find in a really strong sibling relationship. Even though they weren't siblings, the sacrifice and the determination of Ruth to remain with Naomi is incredible, and you should read about that, and you can. Another relationship was between King David and Jonathan. Again, they weren't siblings, but the love that Jonathan demonstrates to Joseph. At one point, Jonathan puts himself in harm's way in order to protect David from his own dad, from Saul. And so these instances show us what sibling love can look like, but the best demonstrations of this are from people who, aren't quite siblings. One of the things that unites these situations and the dysfunction, I think, is jealousy. And jealousy is key to the dysfunctionality and the breakup of many relationships and many relationships within families. William Penn said this. He said, "The jealous are troublesome to others, but a torment to themselves." And Theodore Roosevelt wrote, "Comparison is the thief of joy." I think we can probably just naturally understand that is true. We often feel jealous, but we never claim we are jealous, but we find it quite easy to spot in other people. But I think, it's a human condition, isn't it, that at times we get jealous, and I recognize that when I'm jealous, that it does rob me of my joy. I find it very hard to be peaceful and joyful and happy if I'm feeling jealous about something. I also find that jealousy, often the person who I'm jealous about, it might impact them a bit, but often it's really destructive in my own life. And then especially in families, it's more difficult to get away from your brothers and sisters, isn't it? So when you harbour jealousy towards one of them, it can grow and develop. And when left, it can break up a family. And I don't know what family situation you're living in at the moment. Maybe you've got a fantastic family, fantastic siblings. Maybe you've got no siblings. Maybe you're just in a relationship with friends, colleagues, wife, husband, boyfriend, girlfriend, and maybe the relationship's going great. Or maybe you're part of a family where there has been division and fracture and pain and fighting, maybe for years, maybe for generations. Maybe you're part of a family line that has been broken since you can remember. And that's really sad. But one of the things that I want to say today is that there is always hope of reconciliation. Since the beginning of time, God has been in the business of bringing relationships back together. He sent Jesus to the cross to die so that our relationship with God could be reconciled, so that we could be rescued, redeemed, and brought back into a right relationship with God. And we learn through the stories of Joseph and his brothers and through the stories of Jacob and Esau that even after decades of animosity and hate, that with God, reconciliation is still possible. But it takes someone to break the cycle. And when two countries are at war, one country sends a bomb against the country retaliates and bombs the other country, and then it escalates and escalates and escalates. And when you're in a relationship or a family relationship dynamic where there's constant fighting, it takes somebody to not retaliate in order to break the cycle that can have been going on for years and years and years. And that's really, really hard. How do you do that? How do you break a cycle of potential pain that has been going on for that long. How do you do it? How do you not retaliate? How do you forgive? How do you reconcile with the party that have been harming you, hurting you? It's hard. It's hard. And I think that the only way that we can do that, because you see, our culture would say, if you don't retaliate, you're not standing up for yourself. You're not winning. You're losing. You're being trodden on. The only way we cannot retaliate is when we know in our heart we've had a revelation of how much you are loved by the creator of the universe. You see, when you know that you are loved by the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, the one who has always existed, the most powerful King Creator, when you know that you are loved by him, when you know that you are accepted, secure, and significant, then you don't need your needs to be met before you can meet the needs of somebody else. You don't need the affirmation. You don't need to be destroyed by hurt. You can be a minister of reconciliation, which is what the Bible calls us to be. But in order to do that, it's hard. And so what I think we need to do is we need to stare at Jesus. And as we stare at Jesus, we get an understanding, or we get a gateway into how much he loves us. And that love fills our hearts and enables us to act in a way that are very countercultural and helps to build relationships rather than break them. And so just for a few minutes, I just want to talk about one story of Jesus from the Bible. And hopefully, as I read this story, you get a grasp of how much this king loves you. And it's a story found in 3 of the Gospels, and it's a story about a lady who has been bleeding for 12 years. And Jesus is on his way from one town to the home of an important leader called Jairus. And Jairus' daughter, who actually is 12 as well, is not well. And Jesus is on his way there to heal her. But on his way there, this lady, who has been bleeding for 12 years, comes up. Now, this lady, just for a little bit of backstory, this lady would have been seen as unclean, because she was bleeding. And so that meant that if she was to touch anybody else, that they also would become unclean. And if you were unclean, you couldn't go to the temple. You couldn't mix with other people, because otherwise you would make them unclean. And so this lady had been bleeding for 12 years. She wasn't able to go to the temple. She wouldn't have been able to talk or communicate much with her family. She probably wouldn't have had any friends, because she wouldn't have been able to come close to them. She wouldn't have had a community around her. And she comes to a crowd that are around Jesus. Now, first of all, she's taken a big risk here, because when she comes, she knows that if she's recognised, would be recognised as somebody who's being incredibly selfish. Because if she touches anyone, she makes them unclean. They can't go to the temple. But she's desperate. And in her desperation, she thinks to herself, if I can just touch the hem of Jesus' cloak, then I know I'll be healed. And she gets close enough and she touches her hem. She touches his hem, and she's healed in an instant. And Jesus feels power go out of him, and he stops and he says, who touched me? And his disciples are like, Jesus, there's crowds around you. You know, what a daft question to ask. Of course, somebody's touched you. We're all barging. We're all making our way to this important guy's house. You're going to heal this young lady, this 12-year-old girl. It's going to be amazing. There's crowds here, and you ask who touched you. But this lady feels convicted, and she comes forward. And Jesus looks at her. And it's the only time in the Bible where Jesus refers to someone as his daughter. He says, my daughter. your faith has healed you. You see, Jesus knew already that this lady was healed, but he also knew that this lady, because of 12 years of bleeding, was not part of a community, was not part of a family, did not have any friends. And so in referring to her as his daughter, he calls her into his family. He established her and roots her in his family, in the family of the King of Kings. He's already healed her. He didn't need to do anything else. But he goes a step further and he establishes her in his family. And I just think that just blows me away every time I think about it. And you know, that is the heart of Jesus. That is the heart of God for you today. You know, wherever you are, whatever you have done, the King of Kings, as you turned your back on him, as you walked away from him, sent Jesus to die for you, to restore you back into a relationship with him, because he loves you. You know, jealousy was the thing that in many of the Bible stories was the wedge that just started to get between people and started to bring that brokenness. But you know, in Exodus 34, which is one of the first books of the Bible, it says that the God who we serve is a jealous God. It actually says his name is jealous, because he is jealous for you. He is jealous not just to heal you, but to embed you in his family. Why don't you humble yourselves today and call on his name, and he will be there for you.
Wow, thanks, Mike. Thank you so much. Well, where do we go from there? I love that. I love that Sharon said it a couple of weeks ago in her talk, that God didn't make us and sort of just zap us all and we all came out, you know, we all came out fully grown with no relationship. He embedded relationship into his creation and family into that. Sharon, have you got anything that jumps out to you that you wanted to say first?
Well, it was more that a verse that came to mind, which was Romans 12, verse 18, which says, if it's possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everybody. So I think that just was something that came out. Yeah, we can talk more about that if you like. Yeah, just in that sense of that, I think God's will is for us to live at peace with each other, isn't it? But so often, all these different relationships that we're in get broken. And we've talked a lot about forgiveness. I've talked a lot about forgiveness on Crowd. And that's like a really key thing. But so I think this verse is great because it's saying, do what you can, but it acknowledges that even when we've done what we can, that doesn't mean that the relationship will be restored, because it takes two people for a restoration. But it just makes me think, okay, what things do I need to take ownership for? And it's reminded me of, I think, a situation with my own brother. Generally, we've got on really well, but there was a period of time as adults where our relationship got broken. And it took me a while to realise, I think because just we lived apart. And then after a while, I was like, oh, I think I've actually hurt him. And so it took for me to go and actually take ownership that the biggest part of it was my fault. And just to go, look, I'm really sorry. I realise I've hurt you, and that wasn't my intention at all. And that the relationship was good again. Yeah, sorry, I've just rambled on then.
No, that was great. And I like that, you know, in that verse, it gives us that hope as well, doesn't it? That he's given us that way through. And I suppose with family, we talk a lot about forgiveness at Crowd, but with family, you've got that situation where it's not something you can really walk away from. You're there, aren't you? Or, you know, people do, and you have these huge breakups. But it's something that is much better dealt with, so that family can be restored. I think it can be a generational thing as well. That perhaps you're in a family where, you know, you get on with your brothers and sisters, but there's something that happened way down the line, and it's affected cousins, and there's so many stories like we heard about Adidas and Puma, and there's the big thing on TV at the moment, the House of Guinness, these rivalries. And I just heard last week about it. There's a family in Liverpool, and so far they've spent £4 million on legal fees because of their family has just broken down with business. And we need, like Mike said, we need that staring at Jesus, don't we? I love that.
Yeah, and I think like working for peace is such a challenge as well, isn't it? I know in my own life it's something that we're called to do, but in order to work for peace, in order to be harmed and yet still seek peace, it requires a heart that is resilient enough to be hurt and yet not retaliate. And the only way that is possible is when you know that you are loved by the Creator. But it's still so hard, isn't it? It's still difficult.
You said in your talk, that someone's got to make that first move, haven't they?
Yeah.
Like you said, the person that's hurt still has to make that move.
I think one of the things that came out in the different examples that you gave throughout the Bible of where sibling relationships broke down, there seemed to be a theme of envy and jealousy. And that just made me think about how much we need to guard our own hearts and just like notice, if we have these negative feelings towards our siblings, I think the first check is it something in my heart? It might not be, it might actually be their fault. But as far as we can, to take ownership for our stuff and to not let that jealousy or rivalry grow, but to actually deal with it with God.
Yeah. And can there be perhaps in you two might have examples in your family where you've thought perhaps favouritism has been involved, and you've seen, my parents are, he's the favourite, she's the youngest, she's the favourite, and as a parent, I realise that I have to be careful. I love both my kids equally, but I've got to show it as well. Have you got examples where you might, like in your family, Mike, where you thought, I'm the oldest, I've got this responsibility. The youngest, they seem to get away with it. Was there any kind of favouritism that you perhaps had to get over?
Maybe a little bit. Although I have to say, I suppose one of the things growing up, my sister Rachel was always a lot more mature than me, and so she was allowed to go to town before I was, even though I was older than her. But I think I was, at least astute enough to realise that she was more mature than me, so I could see why that would be. But it's interesting that you bring up parents, because I did think about that. I've got 2 young children. They're not quite so young anymore. But I was thinking about parents, and one of the things I thought as I looked at this is it'd be quite easy to feel quite condemned as a parent when you see your kids getting at each other and becoming jealous and envious. And I think it's important to say that from my reading of the Bible, and I'm open to other opinions, but jealousy amongst siblings, I think, is a result of living in a fallen world. And although parents can make it worse by making different children favourites, I think even if you're a parent and you have no favourites, there can still be jealousy. And I just think that can be, you can feel quite condemned as a parent. And I just think the Bible teaches us that actually jealousy is just part of the human condition. We live in a fallen world. Unfortunately, we're outside of Eden. And that's just one of the problems, I think. But I do think, I tried to teach my kids when they were very young to share. It was one of the first lessons I tried to teach them. And I'm just, the more and more I think about it, the more I think, what an impossible lesson for me to try and teach my kids. That if you give this thing up and give it to your sister and let her use it, then that is the right thing to do. It's just, sharing is just an impossible thing. And I think when it comes to trying to to care for our kids and look after them in a way that is biblical. I think the best thing to do if you have a child who demonstrates that they are jealous is to teach them about Jesus, is to read them stories about Jesus and show them how much Jesus loves them, because I've said it a number of times, but I think that's the only cure.
Yeah.
That is the only cure, that as you show them pictures of Jesus, there's an opportunity for their heart to respond and for Jesus to bring that revelation of how much he loves them.
Yeah, absolutely.
On the whole parent favouritism thing, my kids are very naughty. I've got 3 kids and they all tease me. They pick on one of the kids and say, oh, he's your favourite. And I'm just like, no, I don't have favourites. And they're like, oh, yeah. And I think I try not to it comes up on a regular basis and I try not to rise to it. And they are joking, but I think there's that little element of me going, but are they joking? Do you know what I mean? They're just, very naughty.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think like when there was the 5 of us, that must have been, I mean, maybe my mum and dad were just overwhelmed, didn't have time to think about it, but that must have been part of it. I don't know.
Yeah, I think in my family probably was. I think we just all thought, oh, my little sister, she gets it easy because we're now older. We do the washing up. We have to clean the table, but she's younger and she gets away with stuff.
Yeah.
Not that I remember that, even though it was 40 years ago.
You've let go of that one, yeah? I was just looking at the comments here. We've got Heather, who said she's got one sister and had been an only child for 6 years before she arrived, and she hated the intrusion. I think many people can relate to that. But now, 57 years later, I love her the most, and she's my favourite person. I'm glad it turned out well in the end.
One question as well is that how has your sort of relationship, if you do have siblings, how's that affected you in later life? Has it been a blessing of being able to use those conflicts and stuff that came up?
I'm trying to remember. I really can't remember conflicts as a child. There must have been them, but I can't remember. I think it's more the incident I talked about before. I think that's just helped me made me think I just really need to be better with communicating and listening. And I think as you get older, there's just something about being more purposeful, because often you are scattered, don't live near each other, so it takes more of an effort, doesn't it, to maintain that relationship. What about you?
Well, I'm quite fortunate in that all of my siblings live within a few miles. One of my sisters has moved over to the Wirral, but we all live quite close. And I think, because we're quite close in age as well, that was just such a blessing growing up. To have friends, and there were instances, where we would fight, and I remember my sister Rachel, I would push her on the couch and I would sit on her head, which sounds terrible, and she absolutely hated it. I thought it was hilarious. And then my 2 brothers, sometimes I'd get into fights with them, but when you were back then, if you were 7 and your brother was 4, you were a lot bigger than him, so you could beat him up. Now, both my brothers are bigger than me, and they could probably beat me up. But my relationship with my siblings, again, I'm just very blessed. They are my closest friends, my biggest supporters, and I'm just incredibly blessed, because I know for other people that's not the same.
I think, with my family, we're still pretty close. We're all in the same city, we're all in Liverpool. And we had time where, every Sunday, everyone would come around to my house, and we just did that. That was just the thing we did, but then different things happened in life, marriage, kids, and we do have to be a lot more purposeful now, like you said. And I've realised that, and we've realised that we can drift apart. We cannot keep up to date with things unless we're purposeful. And that's made it's made a big difference, and I've enjoyed getting to know my family a bit more again. You know, it's something that had to be conscious for me.
Yeah. Heather's put here, I think sibling conflict can take every ounce of strength to heal. It's almost easier to forgive a stranger. I think, I can see how that's true, because I think if you've got people who you are close to or who you're meant to be close to, that can hurt a whole lot more than some stranger doing the same thing. Yeah. And there's another one. Where did I see that? Karen's put that that about family relationships. I don't care anymore if they don't love me. It's on them to apologise to me. I'm at peace. I did nothing wrong. I think that kind of relates back to the verse that I mentioned before, where once we've done all that we can, once you can do nothing else, then, you know, if this relationship still isn't working, then it's like giving it to God and living in God's peace.
Yeah.
And we can do so much, but we can only do our bit. We can't do the bit for the rest of the family.
Yeah, you can't force someone else to apologise or do something. You can, like you said, you can give that. You can forgive. You can give it to God, and then trust Him, and pray that in the time we're here that restoration happens.
Yeah, I think we've said many times before, haven't we, that forgiveness is not the same as reconciliation, because to forgive, you can just do that on your own, regardless of how the other person acts. But for reconciliation, there needs to be the other person owning their stuff as well and dealing with that. And without that, you can't have that relationship. But
Ellis has put something here. I'm 9 years younger than my brother, and I used to really wind him up. And even to this day, I still do it in some ways. This talk has shown me that I need to stop.
Well done, Ellis.
Yeah, well done, Ellis.
You can give us a progress report in a few weeks' time, see how that's going.
See how it's gone on.
Yeah. It's got an interesting point here about the fact that Jesus actually had half siblings as well.
Yeah.
And just that, it's something I don't really think about that often, about, you know, how did Jesus get on with his siblings? And actually we've got that in his early ministry. So he had brothers and sisters, and initially they didn't really believe in him as the Messiah, and at times thought he was a bit crazy. Were trying to restrain him. But over time became followers. So it's like Jesus understands what it's like to have these mixed relationships with siblings. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one interesting aspect of our relationship with Jesus is seeing him as our brother. You know, we talk a lot, or I hear a lot of people talk about Jesus being our saviour, Jesus being our king, Jesus being our Lord, but Jesus as our brother is an interesting aspect to his character. I know in Romans 8 it talks about, it says in verse 29, it says, "For those God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed into the likeness of his Son, that he, Jesus, will be the firstborn among many brothers." And you know, this verse comes after Romans 8:28, which says that God is working all things together for the good of those who love him, and that those who love him, who call Jesus their Lord, that God is changing us. It uses the word morphing us into the likeness of Jesus, so that Jesus can be the firstborn among lots of brothers or lots of siblings. And I just think, you know, it's interesting, isn't it? Thinking about Jesus as our brother. I know in the story of the prodigal son, you know, which I think a very famous story in the Bible. But at the end of that story, it finishes quite abruptly. And so you've got the young son. So you've got the two sons. The first son decides that this is a parable Jesus is telling to the Pharisees at the time. And the first son says, right, I want my inheritance. Which effectively, what he was saying was, I want to leave. I want all my inheritance. So he picks up all his inheritance. He goes off. He wastes it. He ends up having to eat with the pigs. And in that moment, he thinks, right, my dad's slaves are better off than me. I'm going to go back to my father's house. So he comes back to his father's house. His father sees him, runs out, puts a ring on his finger, puts a cloak round his back, kills the fattened calf, and they have a party. And this party would have taken about 3 days. It wouldn't have been an evening affair. It would have been a big, extravagant evening, few day long party, very expensive party. And the father welcomes him right back into the family, by putting a robe on and putting a ring on, right back into the family. So the father then goes to see the other brother. Now, the thing in this story, I'm sorry I'm going on, no. But the thing in the story is that the other brother, everything now that the father owns is his, everything. Because the other brother has taken his half of the inheritance and gone. So everything that the father owns right now is his. And the father comes out to this brother, and this brother is perturbed, for want of a better expression. Because if the father invites the other son, the son who's wasted his inheritance, back into the family, then that is going to cost this brother. All money spent on him from now is coming out of his inheritance. And so the father comes out to him and invites him to come into the party. And it's at that point that the parable ends. And you're left with the question, well, is the brother going to come back into the party or is he not? And the dilemma for the brother who's remained there is can I come back into the party? My inheritance is dwindling. Even this party with the fattened calf is taking up money that would have been coming to me. Can I do it? And Jesus finishes. I think one of the reasons why it ends there is because, and this is just my own summation, this is only my own guess, but Jesus is the perfect older brother in that he looked at us and gave up everything so that we could come back into his family. And we weren't like the other brother. We hadn't run home repentant. We were still spending all our money. We were still wasting all our money. But the elder brother, as it says in Romans 8, that Jesus is the firstborn among many brothers. He's our older brother, but he's the perfect older brother because he surrendered everything so that we could be called back into his family. And the more I look at Jesus as our brother, I never had an older brother. I only had younger brothers. But seeing Jesus as our older brother, I think there's something just fantastic about it.
I love that, Mike. It's the ultimate answer to jealousy, isn't it? He could have the ultimate jealousy. You're taking away my inheritance, but he's like, oh, share it with me. It's just that jealousy's gone. He's given it to us. We're inheritance. We can inherit that. Yeah,
and I think the Bible talks about God lavishing his love upon us, and I think that kind of, that story kind of illustrates that, doesn't it? The way, just lavish love and grace that is inviting us in all the time. I love that. Ellis, sorry, just switching back a little bit. I feel like we're going to and fro. So Ellis has put another good point as well. It says a lot of the time with family issues, it affects not just the people who are in the conflict with each other, but even other people around them. Reconciling helps us, but can also be good for those around us. And I think, again, that kind of goes with that parable as well, doesn't it? That I think that's right. It has a knock-on effect. Our tricky relationships knock on to those around us as well. It's not just us.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I just think, what better testimony to the existence of God and to, the love of Jesus than when someone who has that love goes out of their way to be reconciled and to seek peace, as you were talking about initially, Sharon. I just think it's so countercultural because you've got to lay down, you've got to give up your rights to have all your needs met first.
Yeah, give up your pride, isn't it, sometimes as well? It's like, pride, I don't have to do this one. You don't, but this is going to be, this is going to heal.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a testimony to your other brothers and sisters, who maybe don't know Jesus, but also to people, friends and family looking on. I think we probably underestimate how big a impact that has.
I was just thinking then that there might be people watching who actually don't have siblings or maybe don't really have much of a family at all. And I think, again, that's one of the amazing things about the Christian faith, is that it talks about God being our father or Jesus our brother and inviting us into that family relationship. And it talks about how God sets the lonely in families. And that's both a fabulous thing, also a challenge, because we are, I think, people, it's like the world's fabulous because of people, but also that's what makes it tricky, isn't it? Those relationships, they both give us things that we need. We need relationships, but also they bring us challenges at the same time. But if you are out there and you're on your own, don't be on your own. You're invited in. Come on in.
Yeah, that's a very good plug for at the end of this. At the end of Conversation Street, the address will come up in a minute on the bottom of the screen, or in the comments, that we have a Google Meet. So we'd love to just chat. It's like an informal time to get to know you, to be part of the crowd family. Is there anything else, Mike, that you'd like to say before we finish up?
No,
I'm not forcing you. I'm just
not that I can think of.
I think for me, it's just taking that stock check, in a sense, that if you have got siblings, just to think, okay, what is my relationship like with them? Have I done all that I can do to live in peace? Or is there something that actually I need to take ownership of? And if you've done all that you can, and things are still tricky, maybe just to pray a blessing over your siblings and, to extend God's grace into their lives somehow. And like I said before, if you haven't got siblings, just to know that, we're all invited into this family, to God's family, to not be alone.
Yeah.
I wouldn't mind just plugging a book that I think is quite good. There's a book by Neil T. Anderson, which is called Victory Over Darkness, and it's all about your identity in Christ and how he focuses around certain verses that talk about the fact that you are accepted, that you are secure, and that you are significant. And I found it really, really powerful, and it'll help you to be the minister of reconciliation, which the Bible calls us to be, once you have a full understanding based on revelation from God about your true identity in Christ. That's a great book.
Yeah, it is. I only read it this year, actually. It's a brilliant book. Yeah, it's one of those books that in the Christian circle is like, oh, you haven't read that? Yes. Yeah. Thanks so much for joining us. Thank you, Sharon, and thank you, Mike, for the brilliant talk. We'll be back next week, and Dave Conn is speaking, I believe, on grandparents. So, looking forward to that. Again, if you'd like to join us, just in about 5 minutes, 2 minutes or so, come join on the Google Meets, and we'll see you next week.